Welcome back and thank you for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. I'm Romeo Busiku. Let's get into our kickstart conversation, which is focusing on procurement and the role of small and medium-sized enterprises. Like I said earlier, I do have Mr. John Walugembe, who's representing the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, and Mr. Benson Turiame. He's the Executive Director of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority. Both gentlemen are joining me right now in studio, but then I would like to give you a brief preamble so that you can get to understand where we are coming from with this conversation. Small and medium-sized enterprises have a very huge impact for job creation, growth and innovation. The strong involvement of the small and medium enterprises in public procurement allows unlocking this potential for the whole economy. And as Uganda battles COVID-19, this has not been lost on President Museveni. And now to speak to us about this move, we do have Mr. John Walugembe, the Executive Director of the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, and we also have Mr. Benson Turiame, who is the Executive Director of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority. Both gentlemen join me right now in studio. A very good morning once again.
Morning, and thank you for having me.
Let me start with you, Mr. Benson Turiame. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the operations at the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority?
Thank you very much, and good morning, viewers. When the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and Uganda was also one of the countries that was affected by this pandemic, and the President announced the lockdown of public offices and more or less business, which is not essential. The PPDA, or the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority, issued a circular 1st of April 2020, suspending all procurements at whatever stage they had reached. What that meant is that government operations were not on. And why did we suspend? It's because one, offices were locked and they were not reached to ensure that the bids are submitted or the bidding documents are issued to participating bidders. And also it was like ongoing contracts, especially those which had not put in place the standard operating procedures put in place by Minister of Health. Couldn't operate. Supplies to these ongoing contracts were also affected. Therefore, it was hard to continue operations in terms of public procurement, especially in observing the principles of public procurement of transparency, fairness, and competition. Because if we had left that to proceed, procurements to go on as usual, then some of the bidders or the participating companies would be disadvantaged. So what is the effect of that suspension? As you know, we have a budget to execute. Government, this financial year, the financial year is ending on 30th June. Funds were raised to implement these government projects, and procurements couldn't go on. Therefore, the budget absorption in this case is going to be affected by that suspension as a result of COVID. But also, the service delivery to the citizens of Uganda will not be delivered. So the COVID pandemic was seriously affected the procurement function in this country.
And Mr. Walugembe, as someone who speaks on behalf of the small and medium-sized enterprises, what has been your experience dealing with the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority, and of course Mr. Benson here?
Well, just to let you know that you rightly mentioned, SMEs play a very important role in innovation, in job creation, and in overall economic growth.
Yes.
Now, public procurement is very important because government is the largest customer for the goods of all SMEs. This year, government has a budget of about 45 trillion. Now, just to give you an example, about over 10% of this is going to go into procurements. So what does that mean? It's a lot of money.
Actually 60%.
Well, super.
60%.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, good.
So what does that mean, Mr. Walgett?
So that means that if SMEs cannot tap into this kind of market, then it disadvantages them, because this is the domestic market. This is at home turf where they need to play. Now there have been a number of regulations that government has put in place to support local procurements, like the PPDA Act of 2003. You have the Bubu policy and so on, but they all had certain deficiencies. For instance, if you look at the PPDA Act, they only look at aspects of local content, bringing in local suppliers at the end when SMEs have been eliminated. And then there are no there are preference schemes to say we shall give preference to local producers, but there are no measurable targets. So you can say I gave a contract to one person out of 100 and it's okay.
True.
So that's a challenge. And then there are no sanctions if you don't meet those requirements. What happens? So, and then you have the Bubu policy, which lacks the force of law. That's why we are happy that early this year, or a few months ago, you had the Local Content Act being passed by Parliament.
Yes.
Because then it gives now a force of law to some of these regulations in procurement, and not only focuses on public procurement, but focuses on the use of public money generally. So it means that creates more opportunities for local SMEs to benefit from the opportunities that are available.
Indeed. Wow, 60%, Mr. Benson, that's quite high. Now, help us understand, how is the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority actually helping and supporting entities to procure as they meet the guidelines set forth by the Ministry of Health?
First of all, I want to clarify that the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act, the PPDA Act of 2003, decentralized public procurement. What that means is that MDAs, including local government, municipalities and districts, handle procurements themselves. The whole process, right from procurement planning, bidding, invitation to bid, evaluating of bids, awarding contracts, signing contracts, and implementing the contracts, is handled by these procuring and disposing entities, which are ministries, statutory bodies, referral hospitals, public universities, municipalities, local government, cases, cities, blah, blah. Now, the PPDA as an authority provides an oversight role, provide a regulatory function to ensure that all these procuring and disposing entities observe the principles. They must be efficient in handling these procurements. They must be transparent. They must be competitive. They must be fair. They must maximize competition. They must ensure value for money in the whole process. Therefore, in terms of how do we then work with the SMEs and how do we facilitate this role?
Yes.
It is mainly to capacity building. In terms of capacity building, because we are talking about maximization of competition. So the SMEs must develop the capacity to understand the requirements of the bidding process.
The criteria.
The criteria, yes. And they must meet this criteria.
So help us understand what the criteria is.
Now, when a public procurement is put in the place, the opportunities are availed, then first of all, the firm that is going to participate, or the provider, let's use the word provider for simplicity, must be a registered company, must be compliant in terms of paying taxes, must have a trading license, must be in business, must have the financial muscle. If it is a bid of 100 billion and you have never even done a procurement of 10 billion, so how do you participate? So usually they ask also for the previous experience. The turnover, you must have audited books of accounts. And this is, I think, the challenge that our colleagues in SMEs are facing. Because depending on the size of this procurement in terms of value, then you are a small and medium enterprises. So how do you meet this criteria? It may be difficult. But we have worked with them in terms of building the capacity, making them understand these requirements so that they can prepare competitive bids. But also, we are continuing working to see how can we have reservations.
All right.
Reservation for them, for SMEs, so that we say procurements of this magnitude, contracts of this magnitude, where do you have comparative advantage? Where can you do better? So that these can be reserved and the discussions are on.
Let me also engage Mr. Walgembe. In your opinion, Mr. Walgembe, what do you think is the missing link that SMEs need to actually, what do you think is the missing link that SMEs that want to be doing business in Uganda should look out for?
Okay, maybe let me start by saying, how do we assess the current process and how conducive is it to the participation of SMEs? So one, sometimes you have very complex bidding documents.
Yes.
Okay. So every time you have very complex bidding documents, it means automatically that is a barrier to SMEs. Even when they have the capacity, the complexity, it means that now you are favoring people who are educated, who are sophisticated, who can read, who can tick. Because when they're evaluating, they say, this person don't fill out the bid document correctly.
So the criteria Mr. Benson mentioned is making it hard for SMEs.
No, the criteria may be okay, but the even the documentation, I mean, it's like
the whole process.
The whole process, like registering a company. URSB now has made it easy for you to register a company. You can go and file a memorandum and articles of 2 pages and register your company. But previously, you had to take books, 100 pages, 200. So sometimes you have to cut down on the complexity and the red tape. Secondly, are the financial and technical requirements, which we appreciate, you know, but some of them can also be used as barriers. Because if you need to make 10 roads, why do you bundle them together into one bid and say you should have had experience of 20 years, you should have built 200 roads, you should have had a turnover of 100 billion? Automatically, it means that that criteria locks out local providers. The alternative would be to ensure that you cut down on the requirements. You know, people are starting businesses every other day. So instead of giving out 10 roads as one bid, you can give out 1 road and say, give us 5 years experience and then work. And then we have to look at the issue of ICT as well. It can be a good tool, it can be a negative tool as well if it's rolled out too fast. ICT can help ease procurement and transparency. But for those people who are not ICT literate, particularly for people in the informal sector, so it means it can also be an avenue through which they can be locked out. So I agree with Mr. Turami that there's need for capacity building to ensure that the capacity of SMEs is built to comply. A, to understand. B, to be able to comply. 3, to be able to associate, to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But PPDA and the user entities, the user MDAs, also have a duty to reduce the complexity, have a duty to ensure that the financial and technical requirements are able to be met by local providers. Because it's only in this way that we can allow some of our own money to go back into the economy.
Mr. Benson, you've heard from Mr. Walugembe. Now, in your opinion, what do you think is the missing link for small and medium-sized enterprises that want to do business with the government and PPDA?
Mr. Walugembe's submission is quite on point.
Many complexities.
Yeah, and the bidding documents, true, they are. And it's also a capacity building gap, because you don't need actually to read everything. Because when the bidding document, and these are standard internationally, they have sections. There is a bid submission sheet, there is instructions to bidders. Instructions to bidders are standard. If we have read one, you will not need to read them again. Then where the instructions to bidders are defined in the bid data sheet. That is, and those are about two pages. You need to understand that when is the bidding closing? Do we need a bid security? Yes or no? You read that page. Then you also concentrate on the evaluation criteria. Evaluation criteria is also like a 2-page document. Then there are so many forms, you may not need even to read them if they are not required. Then there is a condition, special conditions of the contract. Then the general conditions of the contract. So what the areas to concentrate, that's what I'm saying, the capacity building gap, is the bid data sheet and the evaluation criteria. Because that is where they are going to mark you. Evaluation preliminary, where you have eligibility and administrative compliance. Do I meet these? Yes, 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 yes. Then you go to the technical specification, technical requirements, technical evaluation. Is then the financial. Financial, you are just comparing.
And what is the role of the Contracts Committee and the Community Purchase Committee in all this?
No, the law, again, put structures in all these government procuring and disposing entities. And they recognize structures that are involved in public procurement is the accounting officer, who is say permanent secretary or executive director or MD, or the cow at the district level or town clerk. Then their roles are clearly spelled out. Then you have the contracts committee. The contracts committee mainly was put as a check, composed of 5 members who are appointed and approved by permanent secretary of treasury every 3 years. And they can serve, if you're on the contracts committee, you can serve twice. You have only 2 terms. So these are put to put internal controls, and they are the ones responsible for award. They approve the evaluation committee, they approve the bidding document, they approve that evaluation criteria, they approve the evaluation itself, the evaluation report, and the award.
So you don't need the vote of all 5 people, you only need 3.
Yeah, not the vote, the quorum.
The quorum,
the quorum
yes.
is 3. And then you have the professionals who are in the procurement and disposal units. Those are civil servants or public servants, and they can be transferred. They can be. They provide day-to-day running of the procurement function. So those organs are the ones responsible. And some people think PPD actually will procure. No, we don't. The procurement was decentralized.
Yes.
And the criteria that he was talking about at times complexity. If the criteria is complex, or it is tailored, or it is limiting competition, a participating bidder can raise an alarm with PPDA. That is the oversight we provide.
Yes.
Raise an alarm and say this criteria, and we have had.
Like, is it a good deal? Does it show value for money?
Yeah,
Such things.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's take a look at the COVID-19 pandemic. There were concerns with the procurement of some COVID-19 relief items in terms of efficiency and the quality. Has the authority interested itself in this sphere to ascertain whether or not this is true?
No, the COVID-19 was not anticipated to happen. It's an foreseen circumstance.
Yes.
And when you go back to the PPDA Act of 2003, it clearly defines what emergency procurements entail. And the COVID procurements are looked at as emergency procurements. Why? Because nobody anticipated that there will be COVID. There won't be even procurements in the procurement plan of entities on COVID. So, when a procurement is declared emergency by the procuring entity, by the MDA, then it doesn't observe all the provisions as enshrined in the PPD Act. Irrespective of the value, you can use a method, any method. You don't need to say this threshold requires international competitive bidding. I need to advertise for 31 days. No, because you have declared it an emergency, then you use emergency provisions. But emergency provisions also doesn't exclude competition.
Indeed.
Because you can even put in paper and say, I need you to respond to this requirement in 1 day. And people will respond. So the actual law says you will need to invite at least the minimum of 2 bidders to compete.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Walugembe, as part of the budget week, we do understand that government already has a debt of over 17 trillion shillings. Now, some of that money is owed to you, the small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, are these plans to pay these domestic arrears and recapitalize your Ghana development back enough for you as SMEs?
Well, I mean, we are happy. It's a good first step, and we recognize that the president has taken this as a priority, and he's mentioned it, I think, on a number of occasions, and we have no reason to believe that it won't be the case, because it will help meet the short-term liquidity requirements of small businesses. So as a federation, we are completely pleased with the government's plans, and we urge the Ministry of Finance to see to it that actually this money goes to domestic debtors, particularly SMEs. Particularly SMEs, because it's SMEs that need this money the most. It's because they have been hurt the most during this COVID crisis. So we are pleased with those plans, and we appreciate those plans, and we hope that they'll be put into action. Of course, there are other things that we want. This is not the totality of what we asked for. For instance, we had requested for very extensive tax relief, which we didn't receive. We received deferrals and so on. But at least we are happy that domestic carriers will be paid.
That is amazing. The Executive Director of the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, Mr. John Walugembe, together with the Executive Director of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority, Mr. Benson Turiame. Many thanks for having made the time to speak to NTV. It's really important. Yes. And you're still watching Morning at NTV. Let's take a brief break. We'll be right back with more information. Keep it here.